hello. May we start, please? German time says it's 2 minutes after the starting time. So I don't want to be unpopular in Germany. Okay, thank you. All right, Sarah, let me first give you the time to make your announcements. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just a very short announcement. If you need interpretation for either English, Portuguese, or German, please get a device, because we have speakers speaking in English and Portuguese, and there might be questions in German. So please, if you're required, take a device. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. So in the interest of time, I would like to start. Firstly, greetings and compliments of the new year. And it's time we talk about, and I want to assume that we are in this room knowing that we have a topic about securing land tenure rights, which is critical if we want to advance food security in the context of the right to food framework. So this is our starting point. If you may know that we are in the right room or in the correct panel, if you are here to participate and listen to distinguished delegates that will share some information on this topic. Just by way, first of introducing our panelists, and then I will get back to introduce the substance. My name is Nosipho Jezile. I'm based in Rome. I'm the chairperson of the Committee on World Food Security, the CFS. If you don't know CFS, please follow me after this session. Otherwise, this it's a very important platform within the UN system. So please just know who I am. And I am from South Africa originally, and I'm the permanent representative in Rome to the UN agencies. And now we are here to hear a bit about what is happening in the land area, and reality check is what we need to hear from the panelists, which I will introduce shortly, why it is fundamental for our constituencies to understand a bit about securing land tenure rights. And I think we have the best of the people that have been working in this field and who are here today. And I have Morgan Odi, who's a general coordinator of La Via Campesina, based in France, and who will be sharing her insights in terms of this topic. And I have Kama Abbas, who is a delegate of Young Farmers Forum, which is representing Pakistan Kisan Rabita Committee. And he will also bring us a perspective of the countries, developing countries in this case, in respect of the practice that advances land tenure rights. And lastly, here next to me, we'll have a keynote from Michael Winford, who is here in Germany, Deputy Director for the German Institute for Human Rights, and a member of the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So this then would also set the scene for the conversations for the next panel, and you will get an opportunity to make a few introductions yourselves or questions to the panelists. And I want to make sure that I stay true to that commitment. So just my first few pointers. Land plays an essential role in the realization of a range of human rights, especially the right to adequate food. And I think this is something that we value as a Committee on World Food Security. A secure and equitable access to use and also to the control over land for individuals and communities can be essential for food security and nutrition security. And that is a base to guarantee human rights. And I would like to allow you to think a little bit about what exists in the global arena. We do have a framework that we refer to as the CFS guidelines or voluntary guidelines on responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests, which we normally refer to as VGGT, which provides a comprehensive and guidance for member states and for the various participants and interested stakeholders in the area of food security. And we utilize these guidelines to inform policies that recognize and protect legitimate tenure rights in our national territories. And I come from South Africa, and we are a human rights-based country in terms of our constitution, and would like to make sure that we understand what we mean when we are saying we need to have frameworks in our nationalities that promote and respect human rights, and in the context of legitimate tenure rights. And the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights describes the general comment in terms of Section 26, how states are obligated, or at least have the responsibility to ensure that there is access to and the use of and control of land for the enjoyment of these human rights, and especially in most disadvantageous communities and marginalized people. So with that short introduction, I would like to invite Megan to take the floor and share exactly what do you see, what is the landscape looking like. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon you all. So my name is Morgan Odi. I'm a peasant farmer, small-scale farmer in Brittany, and I am the general coordinator for La Via Campesina, the global peasant movement, which gather 180 members organizations from all over the world, gathering around 200 million small-scale farmers, peasants, and agricultural workers around the world. First, I would like to say that, of course, land is key for the peasants and the farmers. We can't be peasants, we can't be small-scale farmers without land. But it's not only for us. It's also that on this land that we have, we produce the food for the people. We know that small-scale farmers, peasant, indigenous people produce 70% of the food that the people need over only 30% on arable land, which means that already 70% of arable land has been taken by either very big farmers or agri-food companies in order to produce mainly cash crops or commodity crops, which are not food, which mainly are not food. So for this reason, fair access to land for peasants and small-scale farmers, it's key for us to make a living, but it's also key to ensure the right to food for all the people, urban people and rural people all around the world. Yet what we see is that we face huge waves of land grabbing, land and water grabbing, territory grabbing all over the world in every single region of the world, because there is a huge competition for land. And I will name some of the reasons why the competition for land is growing. It's growing in the context of climate change because there is more and more extractivism, in particular for the materials for the so-called green economy. So more territories are taken for transnational companies which want to extract metals or biomass out of the territories, mainly to feed the economy of the global north. And that is basically what it is about bioeconomy. So bioeconomy, it's actually creating a huge incentive for land grabbing all over the world, but mainly in the global south. Another big incentive for land grabbing is carbon offsetting, is the fact that there is a new economy around carbon sequestration, and that many companies or some NGOs wanting to make a lot of money are grabbing land against indigenous peoples, against peasants, against small-scale farmers in order to be able to sell carbon credits and make money out of these carbon credits. Another competition is around tourism or leisure, mainly for rich people, which want places free of people to just have fun. And this is sometimes connected with conservation areas. In particular, in the global south, we see more and more conservation areas which want to take away the people, so indigenous people or peasant communities, in order to pretendingly protect the nature, but not protect it from the mainly wealthy and global north tourists who will come by plane to these conservation areas to enjoy the nature, but against the local people who have actually been taking care of these territories with success for centuries, and who are made guilty for the destruction of the nature, while we know that the destruction of the environment is overwhelmingly a result of the overconsumption of the very wealthy people, mainly in the global north, but also of some of the very wealthy classes in the global south. Another reason why there is huge land grabbing is that in a moment where the economy is quite chaotic, land represents an asset. And so more and more companies or insurances are buying land or capturing the control over land as an asset to be an insurance. And very often they need to also to take the people away from the land and very often do nothing out of this land or just sell some carbon credits, but keep it as a financial asset for their capitalist and financial activities. So all these reasons make it that it's actually the situation right now, it's not so much about securing land tenure, because we do not want to secure the land tenure of the huge landowners who own 10,000 or 20,000 hectares. We do need ambitious policies for land redistribution in most of the regions of the world. We do need ambitious agrarian reforms in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and also in Europe, because also in Europe we do face land grabbing and land concentration. In particular because most of the regulations that were set up after the World War II have been bypassed by the financial economy. So now investors, they don't buy land, they buy shares of companies which own land. And by doing so, the public regulation does not apply anymore to them. And they use this kind of companies which are hidden behind other companies and all those things. And strangely, we have all this IA for many things, but we can't know who are the real owners behind these companies. And this is all the problem with this new financial capitalism. And this has very direct consequences about land grabbing against the communities, and in particular against the young people. Because of that, young people don't have access to land anymore and can't become peasants and do this very important job that is about producing healthy food for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Morgan, for raising that account in terms of consciousness that we require to ensure tenure for the most vulnerable, the peasants and small-scale farmers. Now I'd like to invite Kama Abbas, and you have 4 minutes, Kama. Please, you are free to also share your views in this topic. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Kamar Abbas, and I am coming from Pakistan and a part of farmer and peasant movement in Pakistan, and a member of Pakistan Farmers Coordination Committee. And we are a member of Livia Campesina. As Morgan introduced Livia Campesina, and as she discussed and raised the issues around the land and who is controlling the land, I specifically want to mention and highlight the case of Pakistan, how it is the land consolidation and the corporate concentration in Pakistan, and what's the specific historic context. So Pakistan is a colonial country. So after independence, Pakistan retains its feudal system of land tenure, who is benefiting only the 1 or 2% elite of the country that are retaining land from the British time and from the colonial times. And it's just like very stark figures that we have, like 1% of landlords in Pakistan control 22% of all agricultural land and 30% of irrigated land that we have in country. And an estimated 30 million people in Pakistan in rural areas are landless, meaning that they lack direct access to farmland for their livelihoods. And the most strong institution that we have in Pakistan is military, who is controlling around 6.8 million hectares of land in the country. And there is no accountability for them. There is no policy for them to be a transparent and to give direct access to land to the one who are who is cultivating the land, that is small farmers and peasants. And the state must acknowledge its responsibilities, but they are not doing this, and they are like coming with the policies that are against the small farmers and peasants. And the new wave of corporate and industrial agriculture nowadays that is coming, and they are inviting investors, they are inviting like transnational corporations to invest in Pakistan to grab the land, and they are making and facilitating policies that is going to be more land concentration and the corporate concentration in the country. And currently we have figures like the state identified around 8.4 million hectares of land to give to the transnational corporations and the countries from the Middle East and from US to come and invest on the land and to grab land from the small farmers and peasants. And as Morgan also mentioned about the bioeconomy, it is also linked with the land and how they are facilitating and grabbing land on the name of bioeconomy, on the name of nature-based solutions. And the corporate actors who are involved in this, they are the ones who are responsible for all the issues that the small farmers and peasants are facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kamas, for that account. Again, I think raising the facts about what is continuing to create landlessness and how the various initiatives, whether it's bioeconomy or nature-based solutions, where consciousness is not embedded to make sure that small-scale farmers or indigenous people or peasants have the same equivalent right to be able to have the access, but having only 1% of the landscape, as in Pakistan, being controlled by those that are able, who have the means of production and therefore not giving the same level of access to small and indigenous or even developing farmers. So I would like to invite now Michael for having had this reality check. What would you give us as a broader message? And over to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have prepared a few slides. I have only 7 minutes, so it's only 4 slides, so don't wonder. I hope it will work, and I hope I can move it with this. Yeah, so I shall give a short perspective on the human rights perspective on land tenure, and we have achieved quite a lot in defining the human rights standards concerning land. But that doesn't mean automatically that we have achieved the implementation of it at the national level, yeah, or at the international level. I think that's where we can consider today what is more needed. Yeah, but I give you an update what we have achieved on the international level. I don't see it here, so I have to see it myself. Yeah. Now I see it. Yeah. So let me first say why land is so critical for the realization of human rights. Yeah, land plays an essential role in the realization of a range of rights under the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Yeah, and secure and equitable access to the use and control of land is important for individuals and communities to eradicate hunger and poverty and guaranteeing the right to an adequate standard of living. And the right to an adequate standard of living covers the right to food, the right to housing, the right to water, clothes, energy. You can see many things are land related. Yeah, and you can be homeless by losing your land as a small poor person in a village or in a city. You can be landless as a peasant, yeah, as we have heard. Yeah? And in many parts of the world, just to say this, land is even more than just a place to produce food or to guaranteeing income or to guaranteeing housing. Yeah? It's for many people, particularly indigenous people, it constitutes the basis for social, cultural, and religious practices and the enjoyment of the right to take part in cultural life. It's not only for indigenous communities, for many farmers' communities, this is also important. Then the sustainable use of land is essential to ensure economic, social, cultural rights in the long run. Already 40% of all soils worldwide are severely degraded. So if we want to guarantee this, it has to do something with the way we use it. And they're extremely important, securing tenure systems to protect people's access to land as a means of guaranteeing livelihood, yeah, and avoid and regulating disputes about land. If we see current trends, it's yeah, we have heard already about some. Just to summarize this, yeah, long-term trends we have on high demands in land for urbanization, internal, external conflicts. In rural areas, we have a high competition on arable land resulting from demographic growth, urbanization, large-scale development projects. We have heard some examples. Foreign investors, tourism. We have heard already about this, and significantly it affects livelihoods and the right of rural populations. In cities, we see a financialization of housing markets that lead to competition between different groups for access and control. And we see the big trend of land degradation and overuse, poor management, and unsustainable agricultural practices. Yeah? Combined with the climate change, it might lead to a widespread, abrupt, and irreversible environmental changes and has a lot of impacts. Yeah? The triple planetary crisis on climate change, biodiversity, pollution is really creating more tension on the access and use of land, also potential measures to mitigate this. And we heard about carbon sequestration. Yeah? We see the largest owner on carbon sequestration project is already having 24 million of hectares. Yeah? So all over the world, and you don't know where. Yeah, it's just registered at the stock exchange. So it shows there is a big tendency. Yeah? And yeah, then we have, and this is true for many states, we have weak, mismanaged, corrupt, or even not existing legal and institutional frameworks for the governance of tenure of land, and this exacerbates the problems. Yeah? So small farmers are not protected, particularly woman-headed farms, for example, don't get registered. Yeah? And we had this when the Indus flood was the last one, 2 years ago, 31 million people were affected in Pakistan, and much more than half don't have a legal title. Yeah? So where they will be resettled, yeah? Where they will have a legal claim for this, it shows how big the problems can be. Yeah. So human rights perspective on land tenure, I have 10 points on 2 slides, yeah, that might guide us for the discussion. Yeah. So the first is securing tenure rights. Yeah. And when the voluntary guidelines were negotiated, we found a term brought to us by Brazil saying it should be based on legitimate land user, yeah, or not on property only. Yeah. Those who are using legitimately land for longer periods, I think that is extremely important. Secondly, the state have the obligation. We have 173 states who have signed the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Yeah? They are bound to respect land, so not evicting people by own policies. Yeah? They are bound to protect them for not being evicted maybe by private investors. Yeah? And they should fulfill the right to adequate food, for example, by land reform or redistributive land reforms to secure access to land for as many people. Yeah? Thirdly, avoiding conflicts. We need a form of a land use planning, spatial planning, participation, transparency. What is for agriculture and what is for other uses? Yeah? If this is not defined, land can be easily taken for tourist development, for carbon offsetting, without negating maybe those who are using the land already. Yeah? When we were drafting the general comment on land, which I will introduce to you in a second, it was already that we recognized there are so many areas, arable areas, which has been used, for example, in Cameroon before and is now used for carbon offsetting, for Air France. Yeah? You can sign 37 euros when you buy a ticket, and that's how the land is used. Yeah? Fourth, securing and protecting and maintaining a functioning land administration is so important. Yeah? I already told you, often are people now not registered. Yeah? They don't have access. The administration is not impartial. There is a land transfer is happening without that people know it. Yeah? They don't know even that land is bought. They're just informed afterwards. So there is a very difficult situation at the national level which needs to be overcome by states. Then we have the control and overuse of degradation. The high demand from climate change, desertification, overuse needs regional planning. As I said, land use planning, spatial plannings, and to come to agricultural production forms which are long-term sustainable. Yeah, that's important. The last 5 points are the overcoming the discrimination in access and use of land. Very important is that in many areas, land ownership is very much discriminated. Some groups, minorities, women, never got access to it. Yeah? So in thinking about having a fair access model to land, you need to overcome these traditional disadvantages, and particularly for disadvantaged and marginalized individuals. There's an international dimension to the obligations I have described. Even when German companies are investing abroad, or maybe German development aid in African, let's say, natural reserves, then it's important that they have to respect themselves, that they don't contribute to violations. Yeah? They have to control private actors, German agro-investment funds or insurance funds which are investing there. And they should use their own resources to help guaranteeing the right to food and human rights, and particularly also agrarian reform. Then we have the problem of internal armed conflict and post-conflict situations. Yeah? Not only internal, in between we have more and more international conflicts also. Yeah? Conflicts might be based on structural inequality, a distribution of land tenure from colonial or apartheid system, but also forced evictions, displacements, land grabbing, land dispossession of the current processes which we have heard. The 9th point I want to mention is the defense of, or the protection of human rights defenders. Yeah? The UN Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights Defenders has in this last report said the majority of cases of human rights defenders which are violated are belonging to environmental and land issues. Yeah? So it's the most case, 375 cases were documented in that report where people have been killed or are threatened or put into prison. So it's extremely important that those who are struggling for these land rights are very often targeted politically also. Yeah, and then to conclude, we need administrative and judicial systems in place implementing policies and legal frameworks, but particularly also dispute settlement mechanisms, yeah, in land administration, yeah, for example, functioning court systems. That is extremely important. And I think it's the combination of these 10 elements we have to demand from states. We have these 10 elements which needs to be demanded from FAO, but also from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Let me say, if you look back, we have started by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which covers the right to an adequate standard of living. The covenant has been developed in 1976. We have 2012, the voluntary guidelines on tenure of land, which has been adopted by the FAO as an instrument to interpret this. 56 pages, so dive into it. You can find it on the website. And since 2022, we have this General Comment number 26 from my committee, which describes what states are really bound to concerning the situation. So we have to secure really land tenure rights based on legitimate land use, and we have to use land sustainable, and we make sure that there is an essential implementation for economic, social, and cultural rights. Governance, institutions, and policies needs to be rights-based. That's the simple message I want to bring to you. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Michael. And I think you have helped us to think through the principles that should guide both a framework for fairness in terms of managing the conflicts, in terms of land use, land availability, and also the principles of transparency and equality and sustainability, and how best then do we utilize systems or even processes within nations and nation states to facilitate informed choices in a manner that's transparent and fair and equitable. So there is existing global frameworks that were mentioned, and therefore there's not a lack of guidance. There's guidance, and the question is, what do we use that, and how do we use the guidance to make decisions that enhance equality and access and advance the human rights and the right to food objectives. Thank you very much for this introduction, and I would like to invite the next panel. Thank you, thank you. So our next panelists are coming on stage, and I would like to invite you, and I'll quickly make an introduction of each one of you so that we try and still cover up. We are already running behind schedule, and I would still want to make sure that the audience has an opportunity to ask a question or at least make some interventions also from the floor. So just starting from, again, let me start with Marina de Lima, who is the Deputy Vice Minister for Agrarian Development and Family Farming from Brazil. He is going to be able to share with us, and in 7 minutes, give us a sense of how Brazil is taking leadership in ensuring that we advance the secure land tenure rights, and in the context of advancing the right to food. I also have Ana Maria Franco, who is the Secretary General of FIAN International. And of course, I thought also I should use the opportunity to congratulate her with the promotion in the role, the new role of being the Secretary General of FIAN. Welcome, and we wish you success in your new role, and we have no doubt that you are fit for the task at hand. And next to Anna, I have Juan Enchanove, who is the FAO Right to Food team leader, and our friend to CFS, and certainly he will also give us an insight, and later on we will also be able to reflect on the earlier inputs that we had received. So I'd like to give you the minutes of 7 minutes to say your say, just in having listened to the first panel, having heard the principles outlined in the keynote by Michael, what is working, what in your experience, and what can inspire us as practice, as best practice that we can emulate also in our different territories. Over to you, Deputy Vice Minister Marina. Thank you, and bear in mind that there is translation if in case you are unable to follow through. She will speak in Portuguese.
Sim, yes.
Sim.
Yes. Thank you.
I would like, first of all, to thank you for the opportunity to be in this forum, for the food forum, and I would like to share with you some of the actions we are carrying out in Brazil to guarantee the access to land. We have a scheduling of the Ministry of Agriculture for the family. It's specifically there to deal with the family agriculture. Also involves small plantation, fishermen in local communities and small family farms, and they guarantee public policy specifically designed for this population. And we want to have a dialogue with the social movements, and this had been ignored in the previous governments. And we'd like to say that we have recreated new instances to promote peace in the field and to help the dialogue. The family farming is very important in the eyes of our government to help people fight famine and to guarantee, in terms of food safety. They also help with the climate change. I mean, they help combat it, and they are responsible for the diversification of production in Brazil. So when the ministry was founded again, when it was created again, they had public policies. They also promoted land reforms, and they used the dialogue with the National Congress was started, and they started a dialogue with organizations in the field. I don't know if you are all aware of it. Brazil has a land structure where land is concentrated, big chunks of lands are concentrated. So the small rural areas, they're very small, but they make up and the big landowners, they concentrate a lot in our country, and this leads to injustices and social inequalities in the rural area, and this generates conflicts and violence in the field. And because of that, and especially because this is also in our constitution since 1988, that the right to land is guaranteed. The federal constitution says that the rural areas, rural buildings that are not producing, they should be set free for a land distribution, and the government has decided to do it again. And one of the things we have decided in our ministry is the creation of a new program. It's a Land is for Us. So it's an innovation. What does it mean? We could organize in the normative aspect and the operational aspect, we could get new ways for people to obtain land, and especially those to be used for farming. Land that had not been producing and lands that were in the hands of big debtors to the union that were also used for that. Another way to get lands is when you get lands that's owned by banks and state companies. They do not really manage it properly. And now those lands are being reincorporated into the union, and they will be used for this land reform. And we have also designated federal land for conservation and use. And we have also a rural funding system that was created to buy land, especially for the youth, so that we see young people taking over in the rural area. But we understand that access to land is not a guarantee that the population will stay there. So not only the access to land, we have to create policies that will develop the rural area. For example, there is a loan program to improve housing and structures and to buy goods of first necessity, and also to implement productive projects. And those loans, they have interest rate for those that pay on time. You can get up to 90% rebate on it. So it's like a financing that the government gives, and this is almost for free. And we associate also what the ministry has tried to do, not only guaranteeing access to land. The new policies, they have to be across all sectors for agricultural, safety, and credit. And those are policies that guarantee a stable market. Like there is a program to purchase food for schools, 30%, for example, of whatever is offered in schools, they must be purchased through family farming. And to be able to sell in the market, it makes sure that the market is stable. And furthermore, it's important to say how the governance of the land is important, and it's responsible for the good use and good management of the resources. That must be sustainable. So we must guarantee land rights, and we also have to control the use of the land so that the resources are used in a sustainable manner. And in order to advance the policies of fair and equitable policies, one of the major challenges is the control of the land. Brazil is a huge country, and we have invested in technology to guarantee information systems and the mapping and the monitoring of this land on how this land is being used. For years and years, several platforms have been created in the country, or were created in the country, but now we're trying to create an creation of a transsectional usage of federal and state land. Another important point is the transparency of social control. So a dialogue with the social movements, with the local communities is important, because transparency has to exist, and those policies towards land access plus family farming, and we're talking about indigenous people, traditional communities, and land governance. This is a historic issue that has to be dealt with, and it's important for us. It's important to develop the social and the environment aspect of the country, and this indicates our commitment, Brazil's commitment with food security and peace in the rural area. And I want to bring here, there is a conference about land reform in Colombia next year, it's important to reinforce that this happens so that we can share experiences, how the countries are leading with the access to land. I think we have a lot of areas that are our areas are very similar, and we can fight together towards defending natural resources and producing food. This is a little bit of what I had in mind. I will be here should you have any questions about specific policies, and maybe you want to hear, I would also like to hear the experiences from my partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister Marina de Lima, for this insightful sharing of the Brazil experience, both in the context of family farming, public policies, and that ensure governance of land and with the principles that are enshrined to ensure that the land is also managed sustainably, and those key aspects that you've highlighted regarding monitoring and accountability, and also the systems of transparency, especially your example of the social dialogue, which involves the traditional communities, indigenous people, to ensure that the credibility of the system and the accountability is also visible and transparent. Thank you for that, and I think we will hear later on whether there are specific questions or other similar examples elsewhere. Now I'd like to invite Ana Maria to also, as a human rights lawyer, to also raise or share important aspects of land rights in the context of areas of conflict and post-conflict situations, and also considering the situation of Colombia. How can the rights of peasants, and particularly the rights of women, be implemented more effectively? Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and also thank you for the good wishes for my new role. Thank you to all of you who are here on Friday with us, and of course to the organizers for giving us this opportunity to be here. In fact, as many of you said, land is the adequate distribution of land and the right to land are needed to keep societies in peace and to avoid conflict. And in this sense, we at FIAN think that the definition that is recognized in Article 18 on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas where the right to land is considered as different ways in which people connect to their land is very relevant. Recognizing it as a right means also that it can be claimed, and also very relevant because it is not only about access, but as Michael said, it's also about use and control. And in this sense, very important is, of course, that we see land for the rural communities beyond an asset, as you said, Morgan, that it's not commoditized because this is the way of life of people. I remember when we were negotiating the UNDROP, we said land is for peasants as water is for fishes. So, and this is important. And of course, land is a catalyst of conflict. So many conflicts happen due to the concentration of land and also this concentration and power over land triggered the conflicts, making it a persistent challenge. So in many cases, if you have a conflict, you come to a peace agreement, but there is not a way to change the dynamics on power concentration over land, then the conflict comes back. And that's why we have protracted crisis. In the case of Colombia, we have over 7 million of people who were displaced during the conflict, mainly peasants, Afro-Colombian communities, and indigenous peoples. And of course, it was easier to ensure restitution, which is still ongoing, for those who have their legitimate rights recognized. Nonetheless, it's important to say that just giving them back the access to land is not enough. I remember that in one of the reviews of the committee in which Michel works, women from Colombia were saying, we got the land back, we have the contracts, but we were obliged to lease that to the big owners of land doing cuttery, which means we have the access to the land, but not the control and the use. That's why it's very important to ensure that the restitution covers all the elements of the right to land. And maybe here it's important to say that restitution is not enough, and that's why rural reforms are enough, because we need to change the structural problem of concentration, as I said before. In this sense, also in Colombia, we have had very interesting institutions that have been created by peasants, as for example, the so-called reservas campesinas. This is peasants' reserves. This is collective land that is protected from any kind of external exploitation to ensure that peasants can also continue with their agricultural practices. And in very, very frequent cases, it is really for agroecology, which, as Morgan explained in a former panel, is not only about organic agriculture, but it's really about a different power relationship, also in which women are better protected. And also we had the peace communities. These were communities that said, we don't want any authority, any company saying what we have to do here regarding the armed parties. We want our land to be protected and be kept in peace, and we will not ally to any of these parties. So there are many other examples around the world. Of course, the case of Colombia is not the only one. And I think that key elements in the Colombian context are, first, that the integral rural reform, that's a redistributive land reform, was one element to get the peace agreements. And it's very difficult to implement. But in the moment, Colombia is the only country that is doing agrarian reforms that are redistributive, especially for the rural communities, constituencies that I mentioned. And it also created or ordered the government and the parliament to create an agrarian jurisdiction, which means having this access to justice about which Michael was speaking. When there are disputes there, you need a place to go for the conflict to be solved. There is still a discussion in Colombia if it should be only for problems within the constituencies and the state, on the constituencies with other constituencies, but we think also that all the conflicts with the transnational corporations should be included, and also the environmental conflicts in the context of this transition that is creating new forms of extractivism. And of course, now agrarian reforms cannot be as they were when the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights included them in its Article 11, because now we have new crises. And all what Michael and Morgan and others were explaining, that the environmental crises are a new challenge to rethink the way in which rural reforms, will happen, agrarian reforms, excuse me. So secondly, of course, we have peasants' rights, and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants also recognizes the right to land in Article 18. And we have all the standards that Michael referred. We have also the General Comment 34 of CEDAW, which is especially about rural women. So we have, and the guidelines on tenure of land of the CFS and many other standards. But the big concern is how do we implement that? I know my time is short. And in this sense, very important is that all powers, the executive, the judiciary, and of course, the legislative, have tasks related how to implement the rights of peasants. For example, in Colombia, we got this year the recognition of peasants as right holders of special protection, but now there are laws on agroecology in the parliament, but then we also need policies, and when the cases come to court, we also need that the judges apply these rights. And we also need the factual work. For example, in Colombia, there is a beautiful case in Barranca Bermeja. This is a conflict zone where mainly the activity is exploitation of oil. And we got a project with women that were not connected to any movement, and they began with feminist methodologies to identify what they wanted from their authorities. And at the end of the 2-year process, they got a municipal agreement which adjudicated money for their agroecological projects. They also got a specific right of participation in public policies, and they got also specific money for their own education. And here is very important that we need to involve all the levels, from the local to the international and back, and that, of course, any policy, any law can be done without the participation of the rights holders, in this case, the rural communities. To finish, I would like to say that iCard is extremely relevant, iCard plus 20, because this will be the moment to renew the commitment of the states with redistributive agrarian reforms. It will be the moment to look which good practices have happened in different countries and maybe share this experience so that governments get inspired on how to improve the situation. And it will be also the moment to see how do we respond to these new crises and new challenges that have been well explained here. And therefore, I think that it is very important that every state is actively engaged in supporting that this conference happens, but also in participating with good ideas and with commitment so that we can respond to this crisis in a more effective way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna Maria, for that again reflection and sharing again both the insights on what could work and what the situation is in Colombia, and how the rights of peasants are reinforced and what is not adequate, for further thoughts and the opportunity that will be presented with ICAT plus 20. Thank you. And now I invite Juan to also share in respect of the FAO, having been working intensively on the use and the applications of the right to food guidelines and the VGT, what has been the experience on working on land tenure rights and from a human rights perspective, and what should be the priorities for the future. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nosifo, and thank you, colleagues, and everyone in the room for being with us today. Maybe I would like to start reinforcing something that Michael, Anna Maria, and everyone has already said, but I think it's phenomenally important, which is that, of course, land is not just an economic commodity. It's something which is protected by human rights, but it's also an emotion. The relation with land is an emotional one for most of the people, definitely for rural people all over the world. And I can say this from experience in a way, because I'm from the Basque Country, and in our region, in northeast Spain, your family name is the name of the farm where the family is coming from. So you are literally your farm. So I think this is phenomenally important, because it explains in many regards why conflicts are so much related to land, because we are talking about emotions, we are talking about who we are as human beings in many regards. Maybe the other thing I want to say is that we have been talking about access to arable land, which is, of course, phenomenally important, and many issues and concerns, but maybe a few words in terms of also access to forest lands, pasture lands, pastoralist communities all over the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, Central Asia, and other parts of the world are facing tremendous challenges. And also access to maritime resources and to fish stocks by maritime communities. And ironically, very often those conflicts, in the case of these communities, are driven because of competition with conservation. Areas which are declared protected, but then, fisher folks do not have access to those areas, right? And so when we talk about access to land, we also talk about these things. Extremely complex issues, but already, as stated by all the other speakers, these lands are very well protected. The covenant refers directly, the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, to the protection of land in many regards, and talks about agrarian reform. UNDROP, of course, we have the voluntary guidelines on right to food, but also the voluntary guidelines on land, and so on and so forth. Plus, of course, all the international, protection of the right of indigenous peoples, of women, etc., etc. So it's out of question. These are rights which are extremely protected, despite of which, as Michael also mentioned, are probably those where the people at the forefront defending them are most at risk. Why? Back to what I was saying, because of emotions and because of extremely powerful economic interests. Something that I also think we have to reflect a bit is that the ongoing massive transformation in food systems, with this concentration of power in the hands of few economic groups, whether we talk about retailing or transportation, also affects land, as it has been mentioned before. Basically, the way it works, as we all know, is that as there is concentration by supermarkets, production has to be standardized, big amounts of production are required, and that basically, triggers land grabbing and puts small-scale producers out of the market, and that has implications towards migration and, again, security. So from any point of view, land is at the cross of many of the problems that we are facing globally: economic, social problems, and human rights problems, right? So the dimension of the problems is massive. In FAO, we have been working for several years on land rights, one step at a time. It's not that we can fix all the problems in the world, but at least we have this convening power to operate with other stakeholders and to showcase examples on how to move forward. So for us, of course, the voluntary guidelines on land tenure are critically important, and we have been doing quite a number of things to try to promote them. Not as much as we could like, because of course this required resources and so on, but just a few examples of that. For instance, we have been working for many years in Sierra Leone, in Uganda, in other countries in Africa, in terms of capacity building to the communities, because again, of course, ownership, empowerment is key to advance these rights, but also capacity building to local authorities. We have been also working at the legislative front. It has been mentioned, it's very important work with parliaments. So for instance, in Mozambique, we have been supporting moving forward legislation on land. I guess the case of Colombia, where we have been also very much engaged, it's really a wonderful example of how land and recognition of land can be a trigger for peace, right? We all wish that examples like that, there will be more in other countries that have been facing conflicts. And in terms of conflicts, we are also very much engaged on that. As a matter of fact, next week, next Thursday, we are gonna have an event, we can share the details of that, on land rights and conflict, focusing on the West Bank and the deprivation of land rights of farmers in Palestine and in other geographies, right? Also, the whole element of monitoring land rights, it's extremely important. So we have been working on a tool that we have been testing in some countries, in Kenya, in Malawi, in Sierra Leone as well, and we plan to launch it in the second half of next year. So this is some of the concrete examples. And also during this year, we plan to put forward a report that we have been drafting together with the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights and UN Habitat on human rights and land. So we are moving in these very, very many fronts, right? I also want to highlight this aspect of access to justice, because at the end of the day, without that, nothing happens in practice. So this is also something that we really want to push. And finally, we haven't said much about that. It's not only access to land, but access to land which is of good quality or of quality enough to produce something on it. And that's the other problem because of land degradation, contamination, etc. And of course, as FAO, we have a certain responsibility in that regard. For instance, we host the Committee on Agriculture, which has a mandate towards, for instance, the Code of Conduct on Pesticide Management. And this is also things that we are looking at, how we can much further integrate human rights in terms of use of pesticides, right? So it's not only about access to the land, it's also land which is of quality, right? And yeah, I think I will leave it for the moment, so we leave more time for questions.
You to move around with the roving mic. To those that would like to say something, ask a question, make a contribution. So we have a few hands, and I'd like the panelists to be back. I don't know where, Michael, you'll sit, but you can, yeah, you will stand at some point if you have to also respond. So, roving mic, you will move the mic. Okay, so the first hand at the back, please say your name or where you come from in brief and just one question so that we are able to get as many interventions as possible. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Amgat Jordan. I'm from the Alliance for Biodiversity International in CIAT. It's one of the agriculture research centers, and they're in particular on the food environment and consumer behavior research group. My question goes to you, Marina, following up on what Trump, our favorite American leader, is now planning to reuse land for oil production and even going into national parks. So you have experience in Brazil, quite a similar process. So I was wondering what the civil society or any other political leader could potentially do to protect their conservation land, which is public good, and where we can also learn how we can expand this public good when it comes to private land ownership, in case the landowners don't want to continue working on that one in a sustainable manner anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Next, there's a next hand in the next row. Okay, here in front. Thank you very much. Any other hand so that the mics move closer to you? Just raise it in the meantime. Okay. Yes, please.
My name is Nora Owaraga. Nora Owaraga.
Okay.
I am from Uganda. My question actually is very, very close, my comment, very close to what the previous speaker has just said. Throughout the presentation, I was getting a feeling that the whole situation with the extractive industry and the thirst for fossil fuels hadn't come out very clearly as a real crisis, because now for us in Uganda, we are experiencing that crisis, where there seems to be a hypocrisy that is presenting bioeconomy as, I don't know, a smokescreen that is covering up dirty oil and blood diamonds. I just wanted to ask all the presenters whether this is still an issue and how come it seems fairly suppressed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Nora. Any other comment? Yes, please.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ilse Pelkmans. I'm working for TMG
Isabel?
Research. Sorry?
Isabel.
Ilse.
Isa.
Yeah.
Okay.
My question is whether there are good examples of holding international carbon market actors accountable for respecting human rights. So what is the best, are there good examples, who is best placed to do so, and what is the best way to do so? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are the first three questions. So is that the first one on the civil society, with respect to oil production, that was for you, Vice Minister Brazil. Thank you.
Eu acho que, com relação...
I think that in terms of the protection of the private land, property, it's important to have a legislation, a framework that guarantees this juridical security in terms of private property. And this is what we have tried to do in Brazil with a legislation that guarantees private-public with an influx of public policy that makes the purchase of land a transparent thing. I think this will ensure that we will keep this public policy towards land reform. Brazil has had good experiences with that. And as far actors of carbon markets, Brazil defends the theory that family farming and the traditional communities are those that really preserve the biodiversity and that they keep carbon in the land. But we have a huge challenge ahead of us. That is to unify all the studies that have been carried out and have been, because we don't have a study with solid indicators from a country, indicators that show and what that family farming keeps carbon in the land. It's a little bit of this.
Thank you very much for that. Now let me invite next. I'm hearing myself. So just thank you for that response. On NORAD, also still on the extractive industries, any other comments? Yes, you can have you can take Anna Marie. Okay. Okay. Morgan first, yes.
I think that we need to assess that there was a big change in the end of the year 2010, around 2020. During a very long time, the big corporations were denying climate change. But it was not possible anymore by the end of the year 2010. So they changed the narrative. And instead of denying, they said, oh, it exists, and we will be the champions. So please, let us all the land. We will be efficient, and we will produce everything, and we will solve the problem through technical fixes. And that is where now our big problem is, because they are using the climate crisis in order to grab our land, the land of indigenous people, the land of the peasants. And this is the reason why we do need right now a new international conference on agrarian reform and rural development, because our enemies, the World Bank, the big corporations, the financial sector, they are working on land very, very actively, but they are not working for the people. They are working on land to grab more land, to make more profits for the billionaires. So we have a problem. And that's the reason why we need to create a big alliance with the progressive government, with Colombia, with Brazil, with South Africa, with the social movements to work for real redistributive agrarian reform for the people to produce food and in order to really deal with the climate disaster, with the biodiversity disaster, but also to create justice. Because we live in a world of huge injustices, of huge land grabbings. And we know that if we want to solve the big conflicts that are happening right now all over the world, in Palestine, in Democratic Republic of Congo, in Sudan, in Ukraine, we need to deal with land justice. There will be no peace without agrarian and land justice. So if we are serious about peace, we need to build up this agrarian and land justice, and this is what in La Via Campesina we want to do with good willing governments.
Thank you very much for that response, Morgan. Marina?
Yeah, thank you very much for the...
So Anna Maria, I'm saying Marina.
No problem, we understand. Maybe first on the extractive industries, of course, it's still a problem. The point is that extractive industries are not only mining. Mining keep being a big problem, and now connected to the transition, just transition, energetic transition. But we also have big extractivism in agriculture through the agro-industries, and this keeps being very connected also to the climate crisis. A third of the emissions that are contributing to climate change come from the agro-industries, and we even have now digital extractivism. And on that, connecting to the question on carbon markets, we at FIAN did an analysis of a very specific case of financialization of carbon markets with peasant communities in Colombia planting coffee. And we discovered that there is not enough regulation. Furthermore, not accountability. So when we ask the people, how do you do when you don't know which data are extracted? How are they going to be used? If your dynamics of planting the coffee are changing because now those who support you want that plants that grow quicker, they said, no, we have a WhatsApp group. So accountability is a WhatsApp group. And in this sense, extractivism continues being very important. And I would like also to mention that at the UN we have a process to hold corporations accountable for human rights violations, including extractivism. And the African countries have, especially the people, have said, we need not only due diligence, we want to have the right to say no. And this is not the due diligence of companies. This is the duty of states to ensure that people can say no and that counts. So it's extremely important. In many countries, a strategy against extractivism is agroecology, including agroecology in forest and keeping forest, because when the extractive industries come, and the agroecology projects are there, they can say this is production of food and connect to the right to food. So this is becoming now a strategy with some communities. But we keep having big attacks by companies that, for example, do not recognize decision of judicial courts or judicial decisions. And in this sense, that's why just justiciability is not enough. We have to continue implementing and developing other strategies, political, organizational, educational, communicational, that complement the justiciability.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. Let me now ask Juan, and then I'll come to you and Michael. Thank you.
Maybe a follow-up short comment on that. We humans have very short memory, but if we go back to 2008, which was a horrific food crisis that affected so many countries, there were many causes of it. But one of them was the competition in land use because of production of bioenergy of the first generation, right? The palm, etc. So we already went through that, and no one was made accountable for what happened at that point. And there was a rise in food commodities because there was less land available and big stakeholders playing with that in international markets, right? So that has happened already, right? I think we all should have good reasons always when we see the words bio ahead of any other word to be a little bit suspicious, just because of the background, because it happened before. I'm not saying we should oppose. I'm saying that we have to have always second thoughts.
Thank you, Juan. Kamal?
I think it should be clear that the small farmers and peasants are producing food and not the biomass and biofuel for the extractive industry that we have. And the fossil fuels that are running the planet, We don't need more monocultures that are currently feeding the big market and the big value chains. We need diverse farms and small farms, and we need agroecology that sustain our planet.
Thank you.
And we demand comprehensive and popular agrarian reforms, and we demand that the millions of the landless peasants should have access to secure land. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Kamal. With that, now I invite Michael.
Yeah, maybe one word on these carbon markets. And we will have a COP, a conference of the parties in Brazil. And it will be defined there what type of maybe carbon markets will be allowed in future and under what rules. Yeah, it's the same with bioeconomy. You can't just let them work. Yeah, there need to be rules and standards. And even then, we sometimes doubtful if you can really implement these rules and standards, if you might have, because the power of big investors are extremely huge. Yeah, and we have this, let's say, open up of land markets also since the 90s. Yeah, like the overall wave of, let's say, globalization, yeah, and this has maybe ruined some traditional, let's say, resistances which were there to open up land markets for every international investor. And there is basically no transparency. Who is owning land? Yeah, the big investors in carbon markets are often companies who are guiding the money of a lot of people who are investing in them. Yeah, and nobody knows who is really. They just offer you when you invest in this 3% or what as a turnover, and then they look for areas which can be controlled by satellites. So it's one of the techniques. I just want to say carbon markets are not the only. We still have fossil fuels coming. Yeah, we heard the example from Uganda where it's just total energy. We have a lot of normal agricultural production. We still have a lot of, I don't know, other minings. So we have to see the speed which is there, but more and more we need also then the help of maybe countries like Germany or in France or wherever, when we are setting the rules for these carbon markets, that they don't encourage, let's say, taking of land away from smallholder farmers, or maybe encouraging production which are, by the way, not sustainable and would contribute again to climate crisis. Yeah? So I think this rule setting will be extremely important in this area, and the COP maybe in Brazil will be extremely important. Yeah? So you have a big role to play.
Thank you.
You don't get all the responsibilities. I was mentioning all the other states as well. Yeah?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. I'd like to wrap up then, not unless there's somebody that wants to make the last comment. I see you are all happy with the responses and the reflections. On that note, let me just summarize by just stating a few of the points that have come through the session this afternoon. Securing land tenure rights continue to be fundamental for advancing food security and nutrition, and of course, family farming, and as already outlined in the example of Brazil, does preserve biodiversity and keeping carbon in the soils or within the land. We must be aware of the cover-ups, whatever language you use, where you take from the lessons of the past, denying climate change, but now coming up with cover-ups that present themselves as technical solutions that may lead to land dispossession. And of course, the language that was used was land grabbing. These are important for effective realization of the human rights, and particularly also the right to adequate food. The pressure on land will continue, again, in terms of uses and competing interests, and this being a fact that we need to acknowledge, especially also in the context of conflicts, especially for land use interests that are also aggravated by effects of climate change and land degradation. These are elements that facilitate or contribute to ongoing conflicts and also linked to concentration of land. Again, we've had the example of 1% of land in agrarian land in Pakistan being under concentration, and again, that does not facilitate what was referred to as redistributive land policies. Transparency, social dialogue, especially involving peasants and traditional communities or indigenous people, is an important ingredient for food security and peace. And of course, the examples that were reflected upon here this afternoon do outline or at least bear reference to being the source of the conflicts that we see masquerading the world today. Norms and policies to secure legitimate and land tenure rights and to protect the rights of the historically disadvantaged groups continue to be relevant and need better use and implementation. We heard earlier on that we don't completely lack guidance in terms of global instruments from a human rights point of view, and also in the context of the CFS policy agreements, such as the VGGT and others. These are all guiding national policy instruments that could facilitate land tenure governance, as well as other international normative instruments that, again, were brought in the conversations earlier today, including the Article 26 in terms of the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the General Recommendations 34 of the rights of rural women and Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, or the UN Declaration of the Rights of Peasants adopted by the UN General Assembly. In addition to secure legitimate tenure rights, new policies may be needed to facilitate access to land and natural resources, especially to create mechanisms for carbon markets in a manner that is rules-based and also not masquerading as the existing fossil fuel policies that we are currently having in the various territories of our states. It is also suggested from the conversation that we had earlier on that we need to facilitate land access and access to natural resources for young farmers and peasants, women, men, and use the conference opportunity on agrarian reform and rural development, ICAT +20, that will be convened in Columbia 2026, as a catalytic process and movement for advancing these processes as already outlined, and the ability for peasants and rights holders or right land owners to want to say no when they feel it is not going to serve their interest. And again, in the context of what was also outlined here, that land, people association to land is also cultural and also in terms of emotional connection, which is a right that citizens enjoy, and it is part of our human development. And we need to therefore bear in mind that pastoralists or even maritime communities or fishermen have the interest of conserving biodiversity, but in the context of their own indigenous practices that are sufficient to facilitate sustainable food systems transformation. And lastly, I think what I also heard here is that we should be taking it as a task that with a combined effort of FAO, the Office of Human Rights, Cultural Rights Commission, other agencies, even in Rome, the CFS, that we have to work together to support countries in setting up a human rights-based land management system. This should range from spatial planning up to processes that allow at utmost best the transparency that facilitates the choices, because when you have competing uses and interests, you also have to create the level of transparency that gives a legitimate decision-making. And this is something that if you use both the principles and the system that exist within the CFS of involving all of the interest stakeholders at local level and also at regional level, these would enable better land tenure negotiations and functioning that would be compliant to provide for open and utmost legitimate land use with a formal title, whether then you get to legislative processes within those territories. And I think for CFS now, as the chairperson of the Committee on World Food Security, I would say that it is of utmost importance that the issue of land tenure could be a topic for discussions at the high-level forum that is envisaged in terms of the multi-year program of MyPow for 2025 on the right to food and the 3 Rio Conventions. And these should facilitate the discussions that could contribute value for the conference that will take place in Colombia. I wish to express gratitude to all of you as the panelists and also to yourselves as the audience that has contributed to this session this afternoon. And the interpreters and technical staff, again, for the Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture and the GFFA for their support to make this session a success. And we just went over by 4 minutes, but we had started 5 minutes late. Thank you very much.